Welcome to another episode of the Spinoza Triad Philosophy Podcast, where Dr. Richard Miller, Dan Rowland and myself, John Gibbs, discuss philosophical ideas and try to apply them to contemporary situations. Films sometimes, book reviews, or just things that interest us. In this episode, we're discussing the book Technofeudalism by Yanis Varoufakis. Before on the Spinoza Triad, we have talked about capitalism and the oft-predicted end of capitalism. Certainly, it's a cornerstone of Marxist thought that capitalism will eventually destroy itself, that something will follow it. In his book, Yanis Varoufakis suggests that capitalism ended sort of while we weren't looking, or at least while we were distracted by the economic crisis of 2008. In the banking crisis of that year, capitalism came to an end. Not in the way that people imagined, by an international banking collapse and the fall of markets and revolution, but by something else. Capitalism was usurped by tech giants. They destroyed capitalism. They destroyed the markets, and they destroyed the profits, and replaced it with what Yanis Varoufakis calls feudalism, or something like feudalism anyway. Varoufakis was a significant figure in the Greek government of 2008. He was the finance minister and is now an MP in the Greek parliament. In this book, he explores the rise of capitalism, its transformation from industrial capitalism and corporate capitalism of the 20th century, consumer society, and Wall Street successes of the 1960s, 70s and 80s, and finally the financial crisis, which he says brought capitalism to an end. He suggests that companies like Apple, Facebook and Amazon have transformed the economy to the point where it resembles the feudal systems of medieval Europe, changing the relationship between the consumer, a kind of serf, the producer, the vassals, and the new kings, people like Jeff Bezos. He's insistent that this isn't a new form of capitalism, a transformation, techno-capitalism or anything like that. This is the end of capitalism. And he's also very insistent that this is rather worse, not good news at all. I hope you'll enjoy our discussion as we review the book, think about its ideas, and listen to each other. I think in the end, while Dan and Richard seem fairly convinced by Varoufakis' arguments, I remain a little sceptical. I hope you enjoy our thoughts, whether you've read the book, whether you're going to read the book, or whether you just like to listen to ideas being discussed.
What are we talking about this week, John?
We're talking about, this is Rich, this is your suggestion. It's really a good suggestion. This is Yanis Varoufakis' book on Technofeudalism. We've been thinking about this and what Technofeudalism is and the possible end of capitalism. So it's a familiar theme to us, capitalism and the end of capitalism, but it's a really, really good way of thinking about where we are right now. I think it's a really excellent book.
John, do you want to give an overview?
As before we started, I would say I think there are three things that Yanis Varoufakis is saying. I mean, he was the economic. For those of you who don't remember him, he was the Minister of Economics under the socialist government of Greece. Just at the time of before Brexit, there was Brexit, and when the Greek economic crisis and the banking crisis of 2008 and so on, he was the finance minister, and he's a socialist, he's a Marxist. But he's also an economist. He's now in the Greek parliament, I think. The book Technofeudalism proposes that, very boldly actually, capitalism is dead. And it was killed off. Before socialism could replace capitalism, or before capitalism could expire in any other way, it was killed off by itself. Its own internal mechanisms. And it's been replaced by a thing, which he gives the title to, Technofeudalism. So we are living in the age of technofeudalism, and that is not the same as capitalism. So that's one of his prime ideas. That this is worse than capitalism. That somehow is not a good news. This is not good news at all. So death of capitalism, hurrah! No, it's not good news at all. And that this is, so he uses the term feudalism as a sort of metaphor for where we are now.
A metaphor for the relationship of capital now.
Yeah, so there were characteristics of feudal society. So in a kind of big old Marxist Hegelian kind of way, he's looking at the stages of economic history and saying, before capitalism, there was feudalism. That wasn't capitalism. And now we've returned to a form of feudalism, which is a reasonable metaphor for where we are now.
I think the two words we need to think about are profit, which he outlines a bit, is profit and rents. I think in feudalism, it was a system of rents, i.e. the king or the landlord would charge rent on the land that they owned. And then with the growth of capitalism, we had a system of profits. But what we've gone back now is profits are no longer really being earned in the marketplace. He actually says at some point that the markets don't actually exist anymore. Yes. And we've almost gone back to that feudal system of rents. Now, we don't have a king anymore or a feudal system, but almost unofficially what's happened is that the tech giants have taken on the role of king and lord and duke. And their fiefdom is the digital world and no longer the ploughed field and the strip farming that we had in medieval time. So everyone is earning money from these platforms, which is equivalent to a medieval field. And everyone pays rent. All the people that make money, in inverted commas, are paying rent to the digital feudal landlords. And that's what he's using the word feudalism again, because the idea that profit can be earned is now something of the past. And markets have been replaced by digital feudalism. In other words, everyone's charging rent to Amazon. Like Amazon, I think that much Amazon takes, how much percentage for each transaction that they take. So there's no real competition anymore as soon as you enter Amazon or enter any of these other platforms like Temu or whatever it may be. So is that where he's going with this? So we might still be talking a bit of philosophy here. We might still be talking in terms of profits, working classes, economic growth, restrictions, hiking interest rates, whatever. That's the language of the old economy, and it doesn't really address what's actually happening in the real economy.
This is one of his arguments, the language that we've had can't catch up with it. And I thought there was some relationship here with, civil unrest caused by exploitation within this sort of new class. Well, I guess what would be the new proletariat, I suppose, would be everyone who submits themselves to the cloud.
So that gets to the question why this is worse. This is worse is because of what it does to human beings. It's our relationship in this feudal world. So he would call us serfs or techno serfs or something like that, or serfs of new serfs, neo serfs, and that's not a good thing. That is not a good.
I think it's got quite an interesting kind of crossover here with the sort of panopticanism and sort of new forms of power here, which I always remember this the Foucault stuff we did. New forms of power which both individualize and totalize, so that our relationship to the one sort of totalizing cloud, if you like, is on the one hand power relationship of like I guess of exploitation, because you're giving away parts of yourself, but it's utterly individualized in a way we've never experienced before. Because his claim, and it's pretty hard to argue against, is that what we submit is our data, and our data is the very thoughts, the searches, everything else we do on our phone. So everything becomes radically personalized to an extent where you no longer have a choice. The market's destroyed almost, because it's already given you the end product. Your desires are fulfilled on your past searches, and your data is submitted.
I think that is another aspect of the feudalism analogy, is this. You use the word totalizing. If you lived in the 13th century in a feudal village in the UK, The king owns all the land. The lord is in his castle. He's a vassal of the king. The church effectively defines your existence before and after this life, and you live on the land in a sense defined by your relationship with those other things. So it's a sort of totalizing system, and I think that's another aspect of why feudalism works as a metaphor, because in some ways it would have been quite nice to live in the medieval village. What was your identity? Well, it was defined by your class relationships. It was you didn't leave your village, you stayed there forever. You worked on the land, you were governed by the seasons, and you knew where you were going after you were dead, and you knew the kind of the purpose of existence. It was all supplied for you.
It's totalising, John, no, but the difference is there is still kind of autonomy insofar as you are just one of the many. You're one of the people that work there. You're just one of the many, and what the difference with this is the individualising nature of this as well, where it really extracts any form of agency or subjectivity has become stretched online as well, and it knows you so well. Spotify. He makes the claim about Spotify, doesn't he? That all the music that's put out is something he doesn't know he likes it yet, but he likes it as soon as he hears it. The suggestions for books, they're all books that he wants to read, but he doesn't even know he wants to read them yet. Where he says, it's worse. And he actually says about moral claims, though. He's not making a moral claim on this. He's just said this is what's happening, because at the same time, there's an element of this which makes life easier, doesn't it? It is books you want to read, it is music you want to listen to. So on the one hand, it's very alluring. On the other, it's really stripping everyone's autonomy is being removed.
I think what we're missing a little bit, I think we're jumping the gun a bit about the effects this is having on us. I think perhaps we should look at what is happening, because I think he talks a lot about what's happening in the economy, which is then having the effect on individuals, and why it's happening. And I found that quite interesting. So I think, going back to that point about rent, he's arguing that profit is being taken out of the economy. As profit's being taken out of the economy, there's no further investment. So investment is disappearing, and this is what's causing almost a sense of permanent crisis. The investment is being taken out. So he says, when you had normal functioning capitalism, every £100 extracted in profit from the market, £80 goes to the workers in the form of wage compensation. And then that creates circulation of money in the marketplace. So those workers then can service other aspects of the economy. And this is all, he then makes the point, because obviously he was in the thick of it as the Greek finance minister in 2000, well, it happened before that, 2008, the financial crisis happened. And the response was, when all those markets started imploding over what was the Fannie Mae in the US, the kind of defunct mortgage lender, the central banks asked government to print money in order to keep the economy going. So in other words, you had that whole relationship whereby they realized that if you wanted to make money, you had to invest in your workers. Here it was almost like the banks were given free money. You could then argue that employment has therefore gone almost back to a kind of feudal system. Why is this? It's because the only growth that was going on from 2008 through to whenever 16, 17, 18 was the stock markets. So that mystery, Trump was saying, look at the stock markets, it's all going up. But the reason was that money that was pumped through quantitative easing was pumped. The banks couldn't invest in defunct markets, so they put it into stocks that were growing, which were the digital stocks, like Facebook, like Amazon. The real market had almost vanished in 2008. That's where all our troubles that we're experiencing now started from, because the real market existence really stopped with quantitative easing. And then what happens is all the banks say, where are we going to put this money? We can't circulate it in the normal economy. Let's put it into Facebook, Google, Amazon. That's the kind of process by which it's occurred.
And that figure down as well he gives, doesn't he? He compares, like I said, was it £80 put back in? He said, as opposed to something like Meta, that Facebook put 1%, don't they? Well, it's 1%, he says, so they'll put back in. So and that money then isn't.
Only winners are the new kings, the new, medieval kings who are running Amazon, Facebook, and Google.
And I think as well, it's worth mentioning on here as well that where this is quite interesting as well, because he is a Marxist. He says he's a Marxist.
He's a Marxist, yeah.
Traditionally, through historical materialism, we well, I mean, I say to myself as well, you always assumed that Marx's argument is that you go from feudalism into capitalism, and then the failure of capitalism results in a socialist and then communist through the collapse of capitalism. But this is quite, what's worrying about this is it's a bit one of those black swans, isn't it?
Exactly.
Nobody saw this coming, and rather than a kind of socialist
people-led revolt, the revolution is now led by the banks.
Yeah, which for the people. Yeah, exactly. And we're all utterly controlled in the process.
Yeah, and that's where that's why I interjected. That's where all the stuff that's interesting you're saying about the kind of deadness of thinking created by these machines. But I thought we had to say that first, what the process has occurred since 2008. It's just reconnecting. No, I can't really hear you guys.
Mr. Smith, is it in the the Matrix? Agent Smith is taken Dan out.
Yeah, Dan, that was sort of really good, and I think that is the sort of centre. You're right to get us recentered in this conversation, because that is the centre of his book, really. That is the kind of centre of his book. Is that things in 2008 changed, and you can see why he thinks 2008, because you say that he was at the epicentre of Brexit and what was the crisis of capitalism, and capitalism survived 2008.
Well, it didn't. That's his argument. We used the language, but it changed drastically, and the language, as Rich was saying, hasn't caught up, and that's why we're all just disappearing into our phones, chasing disposable pleasures, rather than thinking about what's actually going on.
Well, that's a neat sort of twist on socialists, isn't it? So like a joke, you thought capitalism was going to go over the cliff in 2008. It did, but not in the way you think.
What I found really interesting here was he talks about the new capital. So leading on from what you said there, Dan, that's the summary there. But the new capital is now behaviour modification. And that's something I found really interesting in there, because really what the algorithm wants is you on there as much as you can be, training it, and it's training you, and you're training it, and you've got this sort of cyclical thing going whereby...
I'd say it's not about mind control. He does say at one point in an interview, it's not about us just becoming automatons. But these devices are to change behaviour. But it's the same. Behaviour modification is the phrase he uses, but it's not kind of sinister or like a conspiracy theory. What he's arguing is these devices are altering behaviour through algorithms, so that you are reflecting your activity back towards the non-marketplace of Amazon or Techno or whatever it may be, so that nobody would start to think, well, I might not use Amazon. I might. Because there's going to be no alternative. A bit like the peasant in the field said, you know what, I'm just going to go down the road and grow my vegetables somewhere else.
But Dan, that is pretty sinister. If you're not aware of that, and you're on your phone all the time, I know people are on their phones all the time, and so if you're not aware of that, or we haven't got the open the language to actually discuss that, I think it's quite problematic, on a number of levels.
The thing is, this is where I'm going to disagree with him, really, because I don't think that particular is new. Although Dan, you're absolutely right. He says, "Oh well, it's not the same as the kind of behaviour modification that was part of capitalism." It is really. It's just much more sophisticated. I think he uses one of the things he refers to is the Mad Men episode, where Dan Draper in Mad Men says something like, "Well, he says love doesn't exist. It was invented by advertising men to sell women's underwear." And you go, oh, right, okay. And he said, well, yeah, the Dan Drapers in the mid-20th century, early 20th century, people like Edward Bernays and card and the advertising guys learned that the way you get people to buy things is by manipulating their sense of their own identity. Get people to desire to change, to attach to a product a symbolic meaning that they are more important, more valuable. It will cheat death. It will make them more. No, it won't just be a nice, pleasurable thing to have. It will actually redefine themselves. So in that sense, the advertising industry made us the product. So in the end, what mid-20th century capitalism did is it enabled us human beings to be the product of capitalism. Well, the fact that algorithms now do it in an altogether more sophisticated way doesn't seem to me as particularly new.
But I think the difference, John, though, is that there's the element of choice that you would get in a market where you go and choose what it is you want. This is the point. It's gone. The choice is already made for you because it knows what you want to buy. Yeah. So I think it is new.
That's what he's getting at. Yeah. And then we use the old language to describe that limited choice by saying, I'm free. I can go to Amazon and choose anything. Jeff Davis is saying, yeah, they're right.
Henry Ford's famous observation, you can have any colour but as long as it's black. That of his first cars. And capitalism of the mid-20th century, the sort of techno-capitalism, presents you with an illusion of choice. It always was an illusion, wasn't it? I mean, there's lots of stuff. There's 1,000 different salad dressings, but they're all basically taste the same. There's 20 different washing powders, but they're basically the same chemical. I mean, surely that was all just an illusion.
I wonder, in this regard, whether or not I saw quite some nice parallels with technological determinism. That really, technofeudalism was the technological logic of technological determinism. You've got really, technology accelerating in such a way that, it's not serving a cultural need. The cultural need's being given to us. And that was Neil Postman's point, that really the cultural practices came out of the development. I think these two ideas run parallel there, that you've got technology which is increasing at such a rate and it's controlling us. I think that's the point he makes, John, where I think you're right with advertising, but the choice is no longer in the consumption of the product. Yes. The choice is removed because it's a cloud. It's not a marketplace anymore. The money's being made from the cloud where the product is, and you're already going to go in there and buy something that they already know you're going to buy. So it's kind of like that's why it isn't capitalism, because it's the cloud. It's the cloud that's making the money.
I agree with Rich. What you were saying, John, is that the advertising world was dealing with the marketplace where people could make rational choices about washing powders or whatever. Even though they were all very similar, you could still exercise a certain choice over price, over quality, over what it is. Now you have to enter into the digital castle before you start making any choices. So your choices don't really matter. And Rich is absolutely right. The choices are kind of made for you by the suggestions that you see on your phone or your search bar.
And it's been made possible. This is his point as well. It's been made possible by the massive investment after 2008, new fibre optics, there's actual hardware investment there, which would on a scale that we'd never seen before. And in the book, he describes a lot of these algorithms. The people that design them don't even know how they work properly now. They're too sophisticated. They're working on multiple layers that it's impossible to sort of break down. So I think there's your technological determinism.
At one point, someone says that it's not physical; it's cloud-based, and then he's making your point, Rich, that no, it's as physical as the railways. It's all that investment that's been put in that has allowed these kind of cloud structures to emerge. But they're very, very physical and require huge amounts of energy, and they've got a huge kind of carbon imprint on all the activities that we do, which is cloud-based. So it's definitely not immaterial. It's very physical.
I was going to say I'm going to persist with my belief that it's not nothing new. It's clearly new, but that its sophistication has become extraordinary to the point where, as you say, the users of a lot of these algorithms don't understand them themselves. That it has become the technology itself has got a kind of technological deterministic momentum, which I go guess we don't fully understand or necessarily are even in control of. I bet Jeff Bezos isn't entirely understand what he's done. He's probably as surprised as the rest of us about what's happening to the world. But the manufacture of choice, what is an illusion in the past. I don't think that there ever was a time with the savvy consumer. You went in and you weighed up the value of products and you chose them. I think the autonomous consumer was gone long ago, and I think we've become a manufactured consumer.
The only thing you're missing, John, is that we were never. People may say they were addicted to shopping, but it wasn't all consuming. You might go to shops for a couple of hours and have a peruse, but you didn't keep them talking about your shopping trip or whatever. But what Rich is saying is this is pernicious. These devices are addictive and they consume 70%, 60% of our waking thoughts, perhaps.
And the key here is that the shift on from capitalism is in the clouds. That's where the profit is generated. That's why it's not capitalism anymore. There's no longer markets. I think part of that, if we sort of stick with the idea of us as consumers, John, you're saying that it's a shift on from it's like a sort of post-capitalist argument, or I'm kind of erring towards what he's saying in the book here, and I think Dan, you're there as well. But he makes some really interesting stuff about then how are we presented ourselves online? Because I love the bit in the book where he talks about authenticity, with something we've chatted about before. There is you need an online presence, whether or not for employment, education, socially, culturally. Everyone has an online self now, and there's a drive for this online self that has to be authentic, or an argument of authenticity. From the political, social, cultural, personal, there is always this drive for a kind of authentic, which he says is utterly contradictory anyway, because it's only ever a representation itself. And I thought, as I looked at it, I thought it was really interesting because it does link on to ideas before. We all talk about fake news now, AI generated. You've got the very thing of it being a representation, sort of, I guess a simulacra.
Well, again, I absolutely agree with. I think that is where we are. I mean, you're right. I think the manipulation of our identity through highly sophisticated means is clearly where we are, and the appropriation of our sort of identity and our reflection back to ourselves is again absolutely where we are. But I just don't. I think it's a development of something that had its roots.
But just one thought is that pre-digital, we never saw ourselves as the product. Advertisers may have done, but we didn't. Like that program you were talking about. Mad Men, thank you. Yeah, they saw consumers as products that they were selling to businesses, but the consumers themselves never saw themselves as products. They just saw people, perusing the shops. But Rich is right now, in terms of this kind of creation of this authentic self. You're creating a product of yourself, which is then consumed by these digital platforms. So when people talk about their online profiles or their socials or whatever it is, you're turning yourself into a product like soap powder for consumption. So you're using the same language that the madmen in the 1950s and 60s used about soap powders, that you do with your own life and your own sense of self, professionalism, whatever. It's a product to be consumed rather than a life to be lived.
And his point is we do it all for nothing as well.
And we do it for nothing.
We do it for free.
We're doing it for nothing, exactly, because there's no other way of operating.
Well, it's not for nothing. I mean, the cost is your
time,
autonomy. Yeah, well, your time and autonomy. I mean, it's the
you give your creativity. I mean, people go online and they produce things in TikTok and they shove them out into the world. There is a degree in which lots of people are involved in the production of stuff on a platform which makes someone else.
And socially, it's seen incredibly positive. And then, look, this person's an influencer. They've done really, and they might have just done, and in order to grab attention, or eyes as it's called now. You've got to keep doing things which are more and more odd, risque, peculiar to get. So keep pushing the boundaries where in this digital cloud there are no.
One of the great discoveries of advertising, we again, to use our word authenticity, in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, they realized people want to feel unique, authentic. So you sell Mr. Kipling's cakes by inventing Mr. Kipling. You sell Betty Crocker's by inventing.
Come on, don't tell me that.
There is no Mr. Kipling, and you sell the idea of there being a sort of authentic, country made, homemade Yorkshire tea. All this authenticity became a great way, because we have a terrific desire to feel that I am individually special. And I'll bet that our reaction to Amazon, if I go on Amazon right now and it throws up to me all the things I've been looking at and things it'll show me stuff
of your desires.
It'll suit my age, it'll suit my kind of interests and the things I've looked at in the past. It'll be thrown up to me. It will create in me, maybe an illusion, but I'll bet my actual emotional feeling will be one of autonomy. I'll think to myself, this is stuff I like. It's brilliantly manufactured a sense of empowerment. I feel.
So you become like you began to feel the irony. It's like you're the king of your own castle. So it's feudal within your own little sphere.
When we speak like this, it's very hard not to revert back to almost a traditional Marxist critique, because that's just pure ideology, isn't it? It's in a traditional sense, the initial Marxist concept of ideology was that it kept you from the truth. We've got this sort of powered relationship or accelerated capitalism, whatever you want to call it, but Technofeudalism, and really this constant interaction online, this thing of ourself, it's really it's masking us from the real relationship which is underpinning that, which is one of, again, exploitation through massive amounts of wealth, which is made possible by us doing stuff. I don't want to say for nothing, but selling or training these devices.
And even if you go way back in time and look at the sort of development of human civilization, to get really lofty about this, you could say as soon as societies start to get organized, then they produce class differentials and anxiety about yourself in relation to other people. And that, in a sense, is a continuum of... There's an essay by Rousseau, which is called something like A Discourse on the Cause of Human Inequality. And his premise is, essentially, people were once equal. Natural man was free in his forest, wandering around picking berries. In some kind of basic, kind of harmonious tribal existence, he was free. And as soon as the first man put a fence up and said, "This is my property," as soon as the first priest turned up and said, "This is how you get salvation," and as soon as human organization starts to develop, we start to develop what he calls this amour propre, the kind of feeling that I love myself, and the thing that I am most involved in is my sense of my own status in relation to others. If you build complex societies and make them hierarchical, you get fear and a desire to be more than you are. You to build. What am I? I'm the things I own, the stuff I use, the things I eat.
Because that's a very good description, John, of what was going on before 2008. How is it different now when choices are run by algorithms, with the feeling that you are being determinate, you are deciding your own choices when you're not?
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? That's his point. The behaviour modification. That's the modern economy.
What I think he's saying here is all those choices are taken from you, and you're still told you're free, but your choices have been eradicated by this death of the marketplace.
I mean, to change track ever so slightly, I thought Chapter 6, Technofeudalism's Global Impact, the New Cold War. Did you read the section on China and America?
What we have now is a clash not of ideologies like communism and capitalism, but a clash of kind of feudal fiefdoms.
Well, yeah, I mean, he talks about the development of the clouds in China, where they've got it's centralized for a start. So your banking, socials, everything's done through the same apps, as opposed to the American model where it's not. And he says really that you won't keep up with the Chinese one because of the centralized government.
So is he kind of arguing that China, as the world's largest nation for population, is acting like Amazon? It's the one separate fiefdom of cloud capital.
Yeah, it's centrally controlled, and it, more importantly, it uses the same apps. So banking, social stuff, everything else is going through the same one. And the Chinese government also control how far the actual cloud companies themselves can go, because they obviously can do that. In America, they can't. And he says then he says, like, things like, the growing conflict between China and America has nothing to do with Taiwan. It's to do with this emerging change of economy, which they're obviously very aware of.
We've got this old way of talking, which is individual freedom, and we keep going on about this, whereas China is just perhaps reinventing these relationships, which is going to create enormous wealth.
Well, China doesn't hide it, do they? I mean, they are very blatant about it. They don't like the sort of what they think is decadent Western values, and they like instead traditional Chinese values since the current leader has been Xi Jinping.
As they call it, the Dao.
And what a brilliant discovery for a authoritarian government. Is the internet. The internet. So one of the things that Yanis Varoufakis points out, he says that all those idealists at the beginning, which Wikipedia is still around, the open internet, the free commons that would be. It might even be the end of capitalism. We'd all be able to reproduce ourselves. We'd be autonomously in charge of our own identity through this free cloud. And capitalist West has monopolized it, and the Chinese have really embraced it. I mean, extraordinary ability to manipulate your own people through the technology that they've really ran with.
TikTok on age, it doesn't allow it. It's got an educational algorithm for kids. It won't allow you to just mindlessly scroll through. I mean, it's they can make those kind of, I guess, ethical choices as opposed to.
Well, they're ethical in the sense that they're trying to produce good workers, obedient subjects to be good workers, and order and control, and a society saturated with CCTV cameras and face recognition and all the technology of manipulating opinion. That is perfect for an authoritarian society.
Where I found it interesting, though, is that it's who owns the clouds really that are going to be the future.
And that goes back. If we jump back to what we were saying earlier about if he's right, the theory goes something like the economics. In 2008, capitalism changed its basic underpinning. The markets disappeared, and they're replaced instead by platforms which are controlled by, which produce nothing but effectively rent out space for other people to be. The producer becomes a vassal, and the consumer becomes.
Levels of production have gone down in the West completely, and it might be what you've just been saying.
Well, we're not. Britain's not a manufacturing country. We produce colossal amounts of stuff. But that stuff, the stuff we produce is symbols, imagery.
Yeah, it's non-tangible stuff. Yeah,
And it's whether you consider the production of a symbolic meaning, which is what advertising does, or what identity construction does, or art, or theatre does, or or TV, or media, or so on. All the things he's really rather good at is the mass production of symbolic meaning.
That's interesting.
And off that, the kind of the new economy, if you like, is in the contested nature of those symbolic meanings, because what the devices don't want you to do is to find something. On the one hand, agree with it. It just wants you online making choices. It wants you to stay on a thread. It wants you to stay on a thing and make choices and get more and more data out of you. So it's not interested. Whereas, I guess, historically, symbolic meaning is something which is agreed upon and generates a meaning like that. If anything, the modern terrain is one of low kind of hegemonic control where we don't agree on lots of stuff. We need to be either, it's all about division and arguments and contested, because just that, all it wants you to do is stay on there, just stay on the device even longer. And I think that's something very new. It was, if we move towards the end of the book, I mean, he talks about what he feels are ways around it, or that we can use. And he talks about using the clouds against themselves almost. So he used the example of Amazon, for Amazon workers, because I don't think we've mentioned, one of the key points he makes is because it's standard of living dropping for everyone. things are going to get a lot worse. People are paid a very minimum, and
Oh yeah.
he talks up there about the cloud and the interconnectedness of them could be used to draw political action against. So, he uses the example of, if everyone decided they weren't going to use Amazon for one day, the kind of disruption that would use in a way to try and improve workers' rights.
I was going to say, isn't that happening a bit with Twitter or X, whatever it's called now? People are moving away from it because of its toxic nature. So I think all Labour MPs were asked to perhaps close their accounts down. So stop feeding it. So maybe that might be the new forms of civil disobedience. It's just to put your phone in the car and not touch it.
What happens, and he uses the argument in the book he talks about, which we've seen in the UK recently, where groups of people have been blamed for what is in actual fact inequality.
The contradiction of the hegemonic feudal society in which Jeff Bezos rules all and so on, and controls our identity. Well, it's not working, is it? As you rightly say, because as Yanis Varoufakis points out, there's the creation of a kind of new proletariat. It's a new disenfranchised proletariat that don't feel satisfied in the end, because the irony of identity production is that you have to make people dissatisfied with their identity in order for them to want to consume more. So you produce dissatisfied consumers. You own increasingly impoverished workforce, or at least part of the workforce is. People who work in the warehouses carrying little wristbands around that tell them how much, tell people how much work they're doing, and the data monitored society, and our schools crammed with kids that are being monitored and dataized as well. So we have a deeply and increasingly dissatisfied, at least part of our population, and I bet to some extent all of us have a feeling that somehow this isn't working. Because if it was, then I don't think you'd get Trump. And I don't think you'd get Brexit. I don't think you'd get the riots on the streets last week of people who are angry at something but they don't know what it is.
I'm just gonna throw a thought there that Brexit, Trump, and the recent far right riots in the UK were not produced by people talking to themselves in the street and saying what's going on. It was produced by the algorithm.
Oh, absolutely.
Trump, Brexit, and the recent far right stuff have all been generated from online discussions. They didn't come from people in the street talking in the pubs.
No, but it's not just online discussions, and that's also within a context of standards of living, which are a result of the techno-feudalism.
That's what the marketplace has to produce. It has to produce a sense of dissatisfaction. But you're right, absolutely right, Dan. It's almost like a poisonous byproduct. The main product is supposed to be the obedient consumer staying online, observing, staying online, following. What you get is the confused, mentally unstable, deeply stupid consumer whose the logic of the algorithm is feeding them information about things that they want to look at. So they are led down rabbit holes of nonsense.
I don't think it's stupid. I just think it's literally people's devices literally bombard them constantly with. I know this because if I go to a friend's house and look at their YouTube, or they pass me a phone on Instagram, but what they're getting is radically different to mine, and that's Yanis's point in this. It's a personalised thing, and it's just designed to keep you on there. That's it. It doesn't care. There's no. It's like a psychopath. There's no in any way, shape, or form human beyond. It just wants you to stay on it.
But Jeff Bezos and the designers and so on didn't want to produce something mad like QAnon. They didn't want people to believe that there were pizza parlors in Washington State that were trafficking children out of the country in wardrobes. They didn't want people to believe. But the fact that people did believe that nonsense, and a lot of other nonsense as well, is like an unfortunate. It's almost like a fault in the program.
But it's just content, isn't it? Just content that you're going to see.
John, I would sorry to interrupt. I would say QAnon and all that stuff emanated from Russia. Or if you read the fantastic books on Putin's fantastic, techniques which he got from the KGB, trained as a KGB officer, using it online, that moderates a lot of. So all this behaviour modification we've been talking about can be used by political actors too. But I was going to say your point about why do the working class feel disgruntled? Going back to the earlier point, if you have, since 2008, the usual relationship of capital being disrupted, in other words, £100 of profit extracted from the market would result in having to pay £80 back to the workers. So if you can then, if that relationship no longer exists, in other words, £100 being extracted in cloud capital, I'm not sure it'd be profit, there's going to be no investment.
But he gives a figure as well. It's £1. It's 1%. So it's from 80% to 1%.
It's a bit ironic that people end up blaming the most powerless people in society for the ills of the most powerful, i.e., why do we spend all our time talking about people coming over here in boats, pretending we care about their welfare when we don't? It's just we don't want them here. And they're the enemy, where people then carry on clicking, consuming, looking, passively, being occupied. That's the main problem.
The algorithm wants that instability because you stay on it. That's the point, isn't it? That's all it wants. It's no deeper than that. Just stay on the device.
That idea that the algorithm wants instability, kind of it wants to discombobulate you, in a sense, so that you see,
because you'll stay on it longer.
Exactly. Yeah, if everything was stable, your point earlier, John, we'd say that's a bit boring. I'll throw that away. I'm going to go and do something more interesting now.
Yeah, I mean, it has to defeat absolutely.
It feeds your fears.
Capitalism before the algorithms, and even more now, has to defeat the idea of enough. Absolutely, defeat the idea you could.
Can you imagine when we were at school in the 1970s, that you became a very odd student, or what a pupil, you use the old-fashioned word. You'd walk around with the Argos catalogue, and you keep flicking through, and your mates would say, "What are you doing, mate?"
Yes.
"I'm looking at the Argos catalogue." Yeah. You'd have the piss taken out of you left, right, and centre because there'd be demand for you as a child to engage. Argos boy. Careful, he's coming. The different colours of his new bike, but we've all become like Argos boys, and we're enthralled by it. We've all become so boring.
Yeah, it's true. That's such a brilliant point, because I can remember when I was a kid, my parents would say, "What are we doing this afternoon?" "Oh, we're going shopping." Shopping? Oh, and terrible, tedious. Now that's.
And someone looking at a catalogue would be just seen as really eccentric. That's gone. Someone weird.
Well,
but we're all doing it, and they're always looking at things like trainers or products, and little video, flick. So it's just like an online catalogue that we're just spending all our time investing in.
And his point here is the capital is the behaviour modification. It's adjusting. You're training it. It's training you. You're training it. It's cyclical kind of relationship.
And the biggest piece of behaviour modification is you stay on it, as you've been saying, Rick.
Yeah.
Argos boy said, "What the hell are you doing?" And we all said, like you said at any point, we dropped these platforms because they're so boring, and we end up doing something more interesting, like going around to each other's houses and having a chat, like we all still do need to do. We're a product of ourselves. We haven't met since 2020. When we see through the medium, we should say, put this away and let's be real people. But that just stay on it, and that stops us being human, and then that stops us from creating relationships which would reinterpret economic systems if we all did it en masse.
I enjoy it. It's enjoyable. You get the best music he can listen to is on Spotify. He doesn't even know he hasn't heard it. Yeah, we're all products of it, because it's much, much easier, isn't it? You haven't got to go anywhere. As long as you're on the apps.
And that brings to an end another episode of the Spinoza Triad Philosophy Podcast with Dr. Richard Miller, Dan Rowland and myself, John Gibbs. We were discussing Technofeudalism, What Killed Capitalism, the book by Yanis Varoufakis. You can listen to this again on Spotify and multiple other platforms. Thank you for listening. Join us again next week.